Ronnie, thank you for joining us.
My pleasure.
Now, getting straight to it, just a couple of months ago we had the papal conclave. Tell me, why do you think that the world, which usually turns a blind eye to what the Catholic Church does, or if anything has a negative perspective, why do you think the world watched with such intrigue? Is it anything to do with the film?
Well, I mean, the whole process of a conclave is so dramatic and so cinematographic and so operatic that it's difficult not to be fascinated by it. You know, so even if we took religion out of the equation, the combination of secrecy, of the scarlet cassocks, of the setting in front of Michelangelo's Last Judgment, the music, the secrecy, that's before we get onto the whole business of the practicalities of how they vote, that things are all done in Latin, and that we announce to the world the result through smoke signals. As I say, even if you were to take religion out of it, it is just such high theatre that in a world, a very visual world, a television world, a social media world, live broadcasts, it's difficult not to be fascinated by all of that. Add into that equation the whole business of faith, religion, eternal life, God, these, to the modern world, exotic ingredients. And it's just utterly irresistible for modern man and woman.
Yes. Now, the outcome, of course, was that Pope Leo XIV was made Pope. Who is he, as far as you're aware? What kind of a Pope do you think he'll be? And does he actually signal a departure from 12 years of Pope Francis?
So, what do we know about him? We know he's 69 years old. We know he was born in the United States, in Chicago. We know that he has a very interesting ethnic mix in his family. Spanish, Italian, French,
Creole, I think there is.
Creole, yeah. African origins in there as well. So he is someone who is obviously the first Pope from North America, but as one of the Italian journalists put it at the time, he is il meno americano degli americani. So he's the least American of the Americans. Yeah. Why? Because he has that ethnic mix in his family, but also he spent most of his adult life outside the United States. He studied in Rome. He's acted as a missionary in Peru. He came back to Rome to run the Augustinian order, then became a bishop again in Peru, took on Peruvian citizenship. So his American nationality is almost an accident. It's not something that I don't think defines him in the way that perhaps John Paul II's Polish nationality very much defined the man, his culture, and his papacy. I would not expect that we will see in the papacy of Leo XIV a hugely American input. And that could be actually very positive because the fact that he has lived outside the United States means that he has not been caught up in the culture wars which have disfigured much of the discourse within the American Catholic Church. He's been outside that. He's been living very different realities in Rome as the head of a religious order. And interestingly, one of the smallest religious orders, unlike Francis, who had been a Jesuit. He's with the Augustinian order, small order, with very deep roots in history, linking back to St. Augustine of Hippo, with its own insights, its own spirituality, which he will bring and enrich the church with. And the fact that he has this kind of universal view, because for the last few years he has been based in Rome as the prefect of the dicastery for bishops. In other words, the department which is responsible for recommending to the Pope who should be made a bishop. Yes. So he has that unique worldview, he has that unique spirituality. And so I think that we will see change. Every Pope brings their own personality to the role, their own tastes, whether that be in terms of liturgy, their own priorities in terms of politics or social issues. What we're seeing so far is a careful Pope, very different from Pope Francis, who typically would come into a room full of people with a discourse and say, I have a discourse here, but it's a bit boring, so I'll just leave it here and talk to you direct. This Pope tends to prepare his discourses and read the discourse without going off message. There are advantages and disadvantages. People loved it when Francis went off message, but it could cause confusion. So with a Pope that sticks to the script, then there's probably less chance of ambiguity and confusion. And for many people, that's something that is very much welcomed. I think we also will see in him a Pope who will be a kind of bridge between the last few pontificates. I see more of the Benedict or John Paul in him than Francis. He will maintain Francis's priorities in the whole issue of caring for the poor, caring for the environment, caring for refugees and asylum seekers. I think he will probably bring more and more solemnity to the liturgy in the Vatican in the way that Benedict did. He's returning to the traditions of dressing the way popes traditionally do, he's going to live in this summer house in Castel Gandolfo. He's likely to go and live in the Apostolic Palace again. So I think what we'll probably see is more of a return to the papacy as we knew it before the 12 years of Pope Francis's time as Pope.
Yes. So you allude to some of them there, some of these external signs. Summer residents in Castel Gandolfo wearing the Mozzetta.
The Mozzetta,
right?
yeah.
The Mozzetta, yeah. Praying the Regina Caeli in Latin, which I don't remember seeing over the past 12 years. Do you think those of us with a more traditional mindset maybe read too much into those signs? Do you think he's a pope for the traditionalists, or is he just observing these external traditions?
I think his being pope in 2025 is harder than it was 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, because people pick up on the tiniest thing. They pick up on, what kind of cufflinks he's wearing and what colour of socks he's wearing and things like that. Shoes, yes. So I think we have to avoid, being so fixated by the details, the periphery, that we miss his message. What is important is his message, not, what kind of pectoral cross he wears when he's delivering it. Yes, it's nice if you like your liturgy to be solemn, to hear a pope singing, in Latin in St. Peter's, which I do myself. But it's not the main thing. The main thing is his mission, which I see in these first few weeks as being one of a unifier. I think he probably is aware that he's come into the role when the church has been a bit fractured, where there have been open disputes and criticisms and tensions and so on. And I think in these early weeks he has been keen to talk about the unity of the church, to stop the church fighting with itself and focus more on Jesus Christ and evangelizing the world.
Now, Ronnie, you're the honorary consul to Italy in Glasgow. So you've got a fair insight into Italy and particularly Italian Catholics, I would imagine. Italy is currently facing quite a serious demographic crisis. People just simply put aren't having children in the numbers that they used to. Can the Pope play a part in this? He's now geographically, quite literally, in Italy. He knows the language well, he knows the culture well. He's the head of the global Catholic Church. Can he inform this situation? What can he do here?
I think it's very limited what the Pope can do. After all, Francis spoke perfect Italian, Benedict spoke perfect Italian, John Paul spoke perfect Italian. They all knew Italian culture. They all understood perfectly the political and the social system. the lack of childbearing is more than a religious question. It's a social question. It's largely to do with culture. It's to do with what people want from life. There are economic factors, huge economic factors, because if housing becomes impossible to afford, if you don't have two salaries coming in, then it's difficult for young families to have children, to have lots of children, certainly. So what can the Pope do? He can encourage governments, not just the Italian government. I mean, the Italian situation is, as you say, quite bad in terms of the number of children that the country is having compared to those that are dying. But it's largely the same across most of Western Europe and across most of the world. In fact, very few countries now have a higher number of babies being born than people dying. So it's broader than Italy. It's broader than the Pope. It's a social revolution. It's about understanding again the importance of the role of parenthood, seeing that as being equally valid as a professional career. And that's really something that politicians and economists probably can impact more realistically than popes and bishops.
Yeah. So there's a great irony there, because the more traditionally Catholic countries, Ireland, Italy, Spain, are all facing this demographic crisis. Is there a correlation there between maybe a response to the faith?
Well, it's interesting. They're all very different. Those three you mention have got quite different stories. Ireland has a very interesting story. They all started, if you like, back in the 1960s, having the same culture, where the church was dominant in national life and in family life. Nowadays in Ireland, the church was in such a high pedestal that when it fell, largely because of the abuse crisis and so on, that fall was so dramatic that the infrastructure smashed. People's faith smashed into tiny pieces. Maybe it wasn't a very deep faith. Maybe it was a superficial faith, enabled, made easy by the fact that the culture was Catholic. In Spain, that Catholicism was tied up again with the regime, the Franco regime, which had effectively nationalised Catholicism, although he fell out with Pope Paul VI towards the end. And again, with the collapse of that regime, in many ways the kind of supports which had kept people Catholic fell away. And if the faith itself wasn't deeply held, it fell away as well. In Italy, they haven't had those dramatic social changes that there have been in Ireland and Spain. There's been a general secularisation, but there's still an affection for the faith, and people would, I joke, but it's genuinely true that if you say to many Italians, are you a Catholic? Of course I'm a Catholic. Yeah. Do you go to my... No, I'm not a fanatic, but I'm a Catholic, absolutely. So they don't have that understanding that maybe Anglo-Saxons and Irish people have of Catholicism equates to mass attendance and so on. They see it more as just part of their culture and their belief system and so on. So they tend to be a bit more relaxed about their Catholicism, and that maybe protects it a little bit from changes in culture, because it just sort of adapts to the changing culture while maintaining the core within.
Yes. Now, Ronnie, you're here on behalf of the Archdiocese of Glasgow. The Archdiocese rightly places huge emphasis on engaging young Catholics. I observe something of a revival amongst young people. Yeah, I'm going to say young people in general, because we're seeing young people come to the faith who otherwise had no knowledge of the Catholic faith. So amongst converts and young Catholics, young cradle Catholics, are we seeing something of a revival?
I'd say yes. Something is moving. Something is happening, not just in Glasgow, not just in Scotland, across Western Europe, across the United States as well. The recent Easter Vigil, where people tend to be received into the church, saw, I think, more than 30% more this year than last year. And that's not because there has been 30% more effort spent on publicity campaigns or 30% more hours devoted to sermons. There just seems to be an interest in the faith, and maybe there was always a general interest in spirituality, but somehow that general interest in spirituality that might in the past have been dispersed among people wanting to, get involved in knowing about crystals and nature and paganism and things, seems to have focused a little bit more on what does the Catholic Church say? This is something a bit different. It's almost countercultural.
Yes.
It's almost a rebellion for young people. Just as in 1968, the rebellion was against to throw off religion, throw off family, throw off morality, throw off rules. Yeah. Today's young people's rebellion, if you like, is to follow their spirit, to follow that call, to be interested, and not to be afraid to embrace this religion, the oldest of Christian denominations, the Catholic faith, which may in the past have seemed old-fashioned and irrelevant. Yeah. Now it seems to be almost trendy.
And ironically, part of that rebellion is to settle down and have a family and to have as many kids as you can. Yeah, it's interesting. I think an example that really struck me was St. James's Catholic Church in St. Andrews.
Yes.
One small parish in a place like St. Andrews, not many people. 30 people, the vast majority young. Yeah.
Almost all from the university.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, and we find that university chaplaincies tend to be very strong now. When I was at university, the chaplaincy tended to gather a few people, but it was certainly not, you wouldn't say, the beating heart of the church.
Yes.
Now, university chaplaincies across the country and across Europe, I would say, tend to be where there is a lot happening. There is a lot of vibrancy, a lot of enthusiasm.
And they're not just catering to existing Catholics. They see their mission as engaging the wider student body. Yeah. We recently had the vote down in Westminster on the decriminalisation of abortion, which is the de facto legalisation of abortion up to birth. Now, I'm just going to very briefly read a statement from Bishop Keenan as the head of the life issues for the Bishops' Conference of Scotland. He said, "I ask you never to give up hoping that the dignity of all human life, from conception until natural death, will be upheld and defended on our shores." That was his response. But what do you think the response of the wider Catholic Church should be?
Well, the human response is sorrow. If we let's take religion out of it for a moment. If we now have a society where it is legal and socially acceptable to kill a child 30 minutes before it comes into the world, but if you kill the child 30 minutes after it comes into the world, that's murder. There's clearly a lack of logic there, irrespective of the morality or the theology of the situation. So I think that we have reached a very illogical situation, and I think that is the kind of approach that we need to take to engage with other people. It is not, in my opinion, helpful to sloganise, to demonise, to go on placards and accuse MPs of being murderers and having blood in their hands. No, it's better, in my opinion, to point out the inconsistencies in some of these ways of thinking, and just ask people to reflect. In any conflict, you always have to allow your opponent a way to give in with dignity. You know, whether it's a world war or whether it's just a fight in the family, you have to allow the person that you're engaging in a discussion with an ability to have some dignity, but perhaps take on board what you're saying. So I think the way forward, and it's a patient, slow process, is just to keep pointing out the inconsistencies and the cruelty of this kind of approach to life, in the hope that quietly people will begin to reflect and say, that's not quite right.
Well, you make a good point at the beginning there that 30 minutes before birth, okay, 30 minutes after it's not. But I think we're getting to the stage where people will come to think, okay, then maybe we should relook at the morality or lack thereof of infanticide. You know, why is it okay at 9 months, but not for a newborn baby? So, ironically, I think that's where that conversation could go. Yeah, interesting. Finally, Ronnie, naturally at SPC we have an emphasis on the quality of our communications. You've spent most of your career in communications. What can you tell us about the art of good communications?
Well, have you got a day? No, a few things that I always say to people that if they ask me that question. One is we need to be prepared to answer the questions that people have, not the questions that we would like them to have. And whether that's the church, whether it's political parties, whether it's charities, we tend to have our answers ready for people. But we have our answers ready to the questions that we would like people to have, not to the questions that they actually have, because their questions are based on their lived experience. So that's the first thing. We have to be prepared to give the answers to people that they have. The second thing is we have to be able to speak people's language. And so often we, whether it be churches, charities, political parties, whatever, we speak our own jargon and we don't know it because we tend to speak to each other more than anyone else, people of like mind, and so we use phrases which mean nothing to the outside world. I see it even in sermons. You go to a church, not necessarily a Catholic church, any church, and you will have a preacher talking about evangelization, synodality, reconciliation, metanoia, kerygma. The vast majority of the congregation do not know what those words mean.
Yeah.
And if you want to engage with people, you have to use language that they understand. People say, "Oh, that's dumbing down." Well, maybe we just have to accept that. You know, once preachers would have spoken in highfalutin Latin. They had to amend that, didn't they? So, you know, we need to speak to people in a language that they can understand. And the other thing, finally, I would say is that we have to get used to the fact that social media has changed people's way of engaging with any argument. Nowadays, and it's a tragic consequence of social media, we feel the need to take a side on everything. So you have that plant pot there. If we put something on social media about that plant pot, people would say, "That's a scandal that you have that plant pot. You should have had a crucifix there." And other people would say, "Why did you have an artificial flower? Is that a real flower?" People want to fight about everything. Yes. That is a very difficult world for us to be in, because instead of people learning, accepting, reflecting, they tend to instantly feel the need to take sides. Yeah. And finally, just to complete it, we also have to be very aware that we're living in a time when the word, any word, the capital W word and the small w word, is always at risk of being pushed aside by the image. A simple reflection of that is, if we were having this conversation 10 years ago or 15 years ago, and we talked about social media, we'd probably be talking about Facebook. And on Facebook, you could perfectly legitimately write 200, 500 words, give an opinion, an experience, and so on, and people would read it. Nowadays, chances are people are more likely to check TikTok or Instagram, which are effectively image generators. Yes. With a few words at the bottom. So that affects how we communicate. The world has moved on from the ability to read and reflect on the written word. I notice, I edit a newspaper, Flourish, and every month my biggest task is to have that front page attractive enough that people will physically pick up the paper, because I could fill it with fantastic stuff, but unless it is attractive enough visually, they won't pick it up and never read the stuff inside. Yeah. So that's something that we really have to be very aware of as we communicate.
Yes. So it sounds like what you're saying, moving forward, our approach, as yours seems to do with the Archdiocese, is to focus on video content, but to not neglect the written word, because there's still a whole generation of people.
I think we have to see the
that.
visual as the hook.
Yeah.
To attract people, to interest people. Once they've seen something which is visually interesting, attractive, engaging, then they may be prepared to go a bit deeper.
Yes.
But unless we have that hook, we have the best arguments, the best articles, the best written content in the world, and they'll just never access it.
Yes, and video content. I mean, there's even, you can put that down even further to long form and short form. I mean, someone on TikTok is probably consuming, in 60 seconds, they're probably consuming about 15 to 20 different themes.
Scary.
And I'm sure they're taking in very little.
Absolutely.
So yeah, that's another challenge. Ronnie, thank you very much for joining us, and thank you for your invaluable work with the Archdiocese of Glasgow.